You're listening to Following On here on talkSPORT 2 with me, Neil Manthorp, along with former England fast bowler Steve Harmison. If you have missed any of the show or you wish to catch up, you know what to do now. You can download the podcast from the Following On feed, available as always via the free talkSPORT app or wherever you get your podcasts. Right, time to talk women's cricket, women's Ashes in particular, with women's cricket writer, ESPN Cricket Info's Valkyrie Baynes. Val, thanks very much indeed for your time. Same format as the last Ashes, multi format. 2 points for the white ball games, 4 points for the Test match. I haven't heard or read any dissenting voices about that system. Is it still popular? Still seen to be the best format?
Yeah, I think so. I think the multi-format series is seen as a really good way of, I guess, testing all aspects of the game. I think the one thing that often comes up is the weighting in points given to the Test match, given that that's worth 4 points. It used to be worth 6, so it has been reduced somewhat, but the fact that it's worth that little bit more, the winner of the Test, it can often sort of skew the overall result. But I mean, then again, I guess you've got to factor in the fact that they're playing a lot longer, so that's why the extra weighting's given to it. And also, I guess, the placement of the Test. Last series in 2023 in England, it was at the start, so there's 4 points won by Australia were really important and basically allowed them to retain the Ashes in that drawn series because they won those extra points first up. This time it's at the end of the series, so that could make things very interesting going into that pink ball Test at the MCG at the very end.
Well, it's a tight series, isn't it? The first game's on January the 11th. Test match finishes on 2nd of February. 3 games, six white ball games in a Test match. That's pretty full on.
Yeah, it is absolutely. And scheduling always comes up as an issue, and it's becoming more and more so, particularly as the women's franchise tournaments are all taking off now. So not only is the scheduling within series a talking point, but the scheduling throughout the year is a big talking point for the women as much as the men now. I know John Lewis, England women's head coach, expressed some concerns over the schedule for this series, and particularly the lack of time to prepare for that Test, because it comes at the end and there's just no time. The only warm-up that they're going to play in this series is a 50-over match. That's England versus the Governor-General's 11 starting on or being played on Thursday. So that's the only warm-up. There's no chance to warm up for the multi-day game. I guess there's a few points to consider there. One, it is the same for both teams, albeit take out the long haul flight that England have had to undergo. But, the schedule is tight for everyone. But you're right, it is all packed in there. If that Test goes the distance, we're looking at potentially 10 days play in the space of 22 days with plenty of travel in between. And we know in Australia, those distances are pretty broad. So yeah, it is a lot to pack in, but scheduling is just going to continue to be a talking point, I think, throughout the women's game now.
Just in terms of who's favourite, I mean, I think Australia, this is a question, have lost a little bit of their invincible veneer. I mean, the last Ashes finished 8 points apiece. Australia obviously retained the Ashes. There's some seriously young, exciting, talented cricketers being selected by England. I'm thinking of Freya Kemp, Lindsay Smith, Bess Heath. They're all being selected for their first Ashes. And also the fact that, well, I actually tried to count the number of England women who've played in the Women's Big Bash, and I lost count. It's about a dozen. So are we expecting this to be really tight? And in fact, are Australia favourites?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Neil. And yeah, it's one of those things you never, just given their history and the length of time they have dominated the game, you never want to discount Australia as favourites. But the points that you make are really valid. And that's the one thing that's interesting me the most about this series is the fact that the last one was drawn. England won both white ball legs of that 2023 Ashes series. So they showed just how much that gap is closing. You talk about sort of the new players coming in, and I think there is actually an exciting mix on both sides. There's players you mentioned for England. We've also had, you know, some other players who are a little bit more firmly established in the England lineup. I mean, Maya Bouchier's been a revelation for England over the past sort of 12 months or so, and she sort of, you know, proved herself in the test format in their recent tour of South Africa. So that's really exciting. But on the flip side, and obviously I should mention too, Lauren Filer, the pace that she brings. But Australia have got some up and coming talent as well. So we talk about Australia sort of being in a little bit of a transition. They've lost a few senior players. They've still got a lot of old hands there, but they've got some exciting new talent coming through as well. We saw Georgia Voll came in when Elisa Healy was injured and just took to, you know, her international debut in the one-day series against India, just, you know, so seamlessly. I think it was a 46 not out, a century, and I think a 26. That's, you know, her first 3 outings in international cricket. Her role in this series might be limited given that Elisa Healy is back. As a batter, at least that we know of so far. But still, that's an exciting prospect for the future. And she's obviously a great backup and proven herself to be, should things go awry for them injury-wise again. And then we've got another exciting young opener for Australian, Phoebe Litchfield, and also Annabelle Sutherland, you know, an all-rounder, and she's, you know, only in her early 20s as well. So they have actually got another crop coming through to replace that next, you know, the older generation, as you'd expect with a country who's got so much depth in their ranks as Australia do.
And it will be on the experience. And you talk about the younger generation coming through, you know, they'll be gaining experience. But from an England point of view, I mean, having Kate Cross back, that is a big boost for England because of Kate's experience.
Yeah, 100%. And I was sort of looking at that today. So England last won the Ashes in Australia in 2013-14. And England have got the most number of players still playing from that series. So they've got Heather Knight, and we know she's still in great form. She scored runs in the test in particular in South Africa. Kate Cross, as you know, back with loads of experience that she brings. Amy Jones was only sort of starting out then, but she's obviously, you know, established herself as a great wicketkeeper for England. Nat Sciver-Brunt, who just seems to keep going and producing match-winning performances for England. And Danny White-Hodge as well. She was there and is still going strong. For Australia, they've got Elise Perry, Elisa Healy, and Megan Schutt. They're the remaining players from that series. So yeah, England have got plenty of experience there, and, you know, and players that can, you know, win matches and have done so for them plenty of times in the past.
Val, just finally from me, does the Women's Premier League hold the same influence over the women's game as the IPL does over the men's game? I mean, I see that in true Indian style, I don't think the schedule's been finalised yet, and it's not far down the line. But it's the WPL which is squeezing this schedule, isn't it? I mean, in the women's game, there's the 100 and the Women's Big Bash as well, which are both immensely successful. And I think, you know, reasonably lucrative for women's professionals. Does international cricket and the Ashes still hold the luster that it does in the men's game, or are there more players concentrating on the franchise leagues?
Yeah, that's a great question, Neil. And I think at this stage, you know, it remains the same as with the men. You say the word Ashes and the players light up, and it will always have that, you know, tradition and, you know, that prestige, and, you know, players will always want to play in it, and hopefully fans will always want to watch it. You're right in that the WPL is another franchise tournament, and a very, very big one that's coming in to squeeze the schedule, which we spoke about at the start of this conversation. I guess the one thing to consider is, and I know that you have, is that WPL, if we saw in that first player auction for the women, that was presenting some life-changing amounts of money for these players who, you know, some of whom had just sort of plugged away for many, many years and never thought they'd see the day, and here it sort of comes. So that suggests that the power of the WPL is probably only going to grow. I think one thing that the women have got to consider there is they've got the men's sort of situation in terms of club versus country to learn from, and they talk often about, you know, wanting to not, you know, go the same route and wanting to make sure that there's windows for these franchise tournaments, and that is something that's being put into place better this year with the new the new program for the next few years ahead. So it is something that they're aware of, but I mean, money talks, doesn't it? And so it's just sort of something that they're going to have to be very careful of. And yeah, it's going to be something that they're going to have to weigh up and manage through their careers now.
And Val, just finally from me, you mentioned there about supporters. Test match day night, it's going to be in MCG. I mean, I've played in 2 Boxing Day test matches. It's an unbelievable stadium. How is the tickets going to go? And are there a lot of people out there going to come and watch the Women's Ashes? Because it is a big stadium, and to fill it for 4 days is going to take some enormous effort. Are other people of Australia, getting behind the Women's Ashes?
Yeah, well, the hopes are certainly so. I'm still waiting on some information in terms of how ticket sales have been going for the entire series, and particularly that test match, because as you say, that's a really ambitious thing it's a great thing to put it on at the MCG, given, the status and the history of the ground and, all of that sort of thing. But, in terms of filling it, it's a big task. They did it obviously with the T20 World Cup, and that was such a big deal. And, I think Cricket Australia are hoping very much to do the same with this test. But, obviously that's over 4 days. So it's a big ask. I really hope they manage to pull it off. It's funny too, when we work in the industry that we work in, we get sort of very much in a bubble, and this is the big thing that we're concentrating on. But it's a case of is that permeating to the people who are actually going to pay for tickets? And there's a little bit of buzz starting to build now that that the focus can be fully on this Women's Ashes, and it's being played separately from any men's series. So apart from the Big Bash, which is still going on. So there's obviously that, and they're sort of putting it on as a showcase of its own, and sort of talking to the players. They're I guess still in the similar kind of a bubble that we work in, but they're really excited about, and it's just I guess going to be a matter of waiting to see if that permeates into the public, and here's hoping.
Val, I've loved your work for ages. You're my go-to source of information for women's cricket. So thank you for your time, and really, really enjoy the Ashes. And hopefully we'll get you on in a couple of weeks' time for an update. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been delightful to talk to you. Thank you.